Hey, Zern listeners, we have a special guest with us on the podcast today, Andres. He emailed me from Antioch. He's a student at Antioch right now. He's a classmate of Alina, my brother's kid, an employee of psychology in Seattle. Andres emailed me some questions asking about early career advice, and I thought, maybe we could just make an episode out of it. And I had Andres up to my office. It's always great to actually talk with people in person instead of through video conference. Welcome to the podcast, Andres.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you for having me.
So you are training to become a counselor. You're in the CMHC program at Antioch.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, what is your plan? What do you want to do after you graduate?
After I graduate, I'd like to start a private practice and help people through that. But honestly, I'm also open to other paths. What I really want to do is to be in a place where I can help people in intimate, personal ways, meaningful ways. And how that exactly pans out, I don't know yet. I think it may be through private practice just because I'd like to have freedom in my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also open to something else happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. And that's how I felt about it when I was in your position. I wanted to help people in intimate ways. That's a good way to put it. I, at first, was thinking about other professions that do that kind of thing. And then it just popped in my head that, well, therapists do that. So maybe that's what I should be. And that's an interesting road to take regarding career choices, right? It's not that I said I want to be a therapist. It's that I said I want to help people in a one-on-one or small group format conversations, deep conversations.
Right.
And I thought, well, what profession does that?
Yeah.
So I think that says something about your motivation is true, right? You're not wanting to be a therapist so that you can say that you're a therapist. You want to be a therapist because you want to have those deep conversations, right, ongoing conversations with people, and to try to make the world a better place. And also, I wanted to be in private practice because it would make my schedule easier, primarily because I'm not a morning person.
Yeah.
I am one of the most non-morning people I've ever met, honestly. Some people say like, "Oh, I'm not a morning person." Yeah, I'll sometimes sleep until 8:30, and I'm thinking 8:30. I go to bed at like 3:30. I have to force myself to go to bed, so my circadian rhythm doesn't match up well with like office work and corporation hours. So you had some questions that you wanted to ask me, so fire away.
Maybe we can start with what are your thoughts, or let's say top 3 tips for a fruitful graduate experience.
Yeah. You sent me these questions, so I jotted down some notes. My top 3 tips for a fruitful grad school experience was your question. My number 1 is to lower your anxiety. You're going to have some anxiety. I think that's natural. It's also appropriate to some level because there's a lot at stake and a lot of bad things can happen, and that's why we tend to be afraid. We could accidentally harm a client. We could be kicked out of the program. We could fail our classes. There's things at stake. You're spending a lot of time and money. A lot of yourself is involved. You told all your family and friends that this is what you're doing. If you fail out of the situation, then it's not a good outcome. So recognizing that anxiety and naming it and talking about it is rational and good. And we need to address it because it can interfere with our learning and our process of growth, right? If we're in a state of danger and threat and survival, then we're not open, we're not exploring, we're not really even learning. We're just trying to stay out of trouble, right? So lowering anxiety. Now, how does one lower anxiety? I think a common tip, and it's not a bad tip, but it certainly shouldn't end with this, is that you should just combat it inside of your own head. and reassure yourself or tell yourself to not worry or something. And that can help. Self-talk and that sort of thing is useful at times. But I find for myself a much more effective way of lowering my anxiety is when I feel safe with people, when I have trust that others are not in threat of me, that they're not going to get me, that they'll give me the benefit of the doubt, or that there's an avenue for conversation to make up for mistakes that I inevitably will make. So how do I get there? Well, I have to build connections with people, with professors, with students. The nice thing about Antioch is that although it's a fairly larger program when it comes to counseling compared to other programs, we still have, it's still pretty small. So you can get to know professors and have professors across multiple courses. And so you can build those relationships. Or even if you just have a one-off adjunct professor, getting to know them, having a conversation with them outside of the class time, requesting a meeting. People would do that with me all the time, students. 99% of the time, I would oblige. And I wanted to do that, especially if they said, I'm anxious, it says nothing about you, but if I had a chance to just chat with you for 15 minutes, it would relieve my anxiety just a little bit, just to have some level of trust or connection or something. So that's one. Also, just with your fellow students, becoming friends. So, well, let me ask you, Andres, are you connecting with your professors? I mean, you reached out to me.
Yeah.
But are you connecting with your professors and your fellow classmates?
I am, as much as I can. I'm sure this experience is across the board. Everybody's super busy. I am very busy with family, work, and other things outside of grad school. So I would love to have more time to connect deeply with classmates, make friends, connect more with professors as well.
Do you have anxiety about being in school?
And this will probably be reflected on the questions that I will keep asking you later. Is, am I learning enough? Am I actually integrating all of these learnings and insights I'm learning about myself, about the profession, about therapy, as I should, so that I can be of help, really good help later when I'm a therapist? Am I using this this experience to the fullest? I guess there's some anxiety around those topics that are connected to grad school and to the learning experience. Do you
feel, because in the questions that I read from you along these lines, do you worry that you only have so much time in graduate school and only so much time outside of your the other aspects of your life to actually concentrate on school? Are you worried that the opportunities will pass you by and you'll graduate having not capitalized on graduate school enough? Yeah,
I think another part is maybe something about my personality which somehow strives for, I wouldn't say perfection, but constant improvement. But maybe that quest for constant improvement can, produce unnecessary distress sometimes. So I recognize that, and I'm working to, manage that anxiety or that unnecessary need for more somehow. But yeah, I think it's a process I'm still in right now.
When you think about improving yourself and being driven in that way, do you feel that you're a good person regardless?
What do you mean a good person?
Worthy, good enough, that you like yourself as you are now, regardless of growing in the future?
Yeah. I think self-esteem and all of that is okay. I do like myself. And
so it's a complicated question, but if that's the general vibe, then research shows, and I find this true for myself, that to be highly driven in whatever pursuit it is, while having good self-esteem, good enough self-esteem, usually means that we will navigate it well. It's when we're running towards self-esteem by trying to achieve things in a perfectionistic way that results in suffering and not achieving self-esteem, because it's hard to establish self-worth through achievements. We need self-esteem through being loved and told and appreciated by the people around us. That usually doesn't happen, at least in a deep way, from like achievements. So, I think given that, there's a good chance that your drive is healthy. I find that perfectionism, healthy perfectionism, and that drive, when I realize my goals now and then, is one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. We just completed our deep dive on Elon Musk. We finished recording it, and I was fairly perfectionistic about it. I spent a lot of time looking into it, going over the notes, really trying to figure stuff out, really trying to lay out arguments, really trying to edit it well, And stepping back after that creation, I feel really satisfied with it. It's like this thing that I did, So, I think being driven is a good thing. But getting to the worry about graduate school and capitalizing on it, right?
Right.
Being driven and worried about not capitalizing, I think, is a good thing, because you're only going to be in graduate school for a short percentage of your overall career, right? So I think that's a good thing. And I find that some students don't capitalize on it. They are just trying to survive, or they're not really leaning into the process. But having said all that, the thing to recognize is that in all likelihood, I'll just speak for myself, 99% of everything that I know and have grown from and have developed from happened outside of graduate school. So however much you capitalize or don't capitalize on graduate school, it will amount to a minuscule amount of your overall learning and growth.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you just mail it in when you're doing graduate school, but it just puts it in perspective that your drive to grow and your worry about not making the best use of your time, that will extend beyond graduation. You'll graduate and you'll be in private practice, and you'll still be driven along those lines, and you will know that you have a lot to learn and you have a lot to develop, and there's always something new to work on and something new to extend yourself into.
Yeah.
So one, tip is to lower anxiety and to do it, I think, relationally. The other part of this, a related tip, is to accept your incompetence. By definition, you are incompetent as a counselor. You're not allowed to see clients yet. Why? Because you're incompetent. And when I tell this to students, I learned over time that I would have, and just from my own experience as well, that I would have to tell students that you are inherently incompetent as a therapist. You might be a good listener, but by definition, you do not have the competency levels. You have not demonstrated competency. You have not absorbed the skill or practiced the skill and demonstrated skill such that you are deemed competent by your trainers. So accept that. And when I say that, every student will, or most students will, kind of blanch at it and giggle at it. You giggled at it a little bit too, because it's this wild notion that, wait, I'm incompetent at something? Because graduate students typically are top of the class, the smartest kids at school, and they're not used to being considered incompetent, know? But if you were competent, then you wouldn't need a graduate degree, right? Plus, there's so many areas of competency and different degrees of competency that you will be competent enough to practice when you start as an intern, by definition, but you won't be significantly competent in all the areas that you will develop competency in throughout your career. And just accepting that, because the professors do not think of you as being competent. They know you're incompetent. So stop trying to act like you are already competent, right? Stop trying to prove yourself that you already know what you're doing and that you're already a good counselor. Just sit back and relax and absorb and make mistakes, and know that your professors are there to guide you and to help you. And which leads me to another aspect of this, is that it's not your job to become competent. It's your job to absorb what is happening to you with the professor. There's a lot of things happening, both personally and intellectually and everything. It's the professor's job to figure out how to get you to competency and to walk you through the process. It's not your job to figure out, so, okay, how am I going to make sure that I'm competent? That's the professor's job. They're supposed to have a curriculum, and they're supposed to have eyes on you and, to some extent personally guide you and evaluate you to get you to competence by the end of each course in that topic. And if you've achieved competency, and that's the way we grade, we don't give A, B, and C, we give competency levels. And if you've achieved the minimum level of competency to pass the class, then you've been deemed competent enough to move forward. So understand that, and to understand that there's a learning curve. For me, if we look at a curve, a parabola on a graph, XY, and over time, let's say that on the learning curve, I'm like at the 50% mark of total learning and skill or whatever as a clinician. Well, if I rewind the clock back on that scale, right, in time, I'm going further and further down in the competency percentage. Well, when I was at your phase, which you're about a year into your program right now,
Mm-hmm.
I was like at 2% competency or 2% skill or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious when you look at it that way that you're incompetent. You're 2%. That doesn't mean you're worthless or you're stupid or something. It just means that you have a long fucking way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that makes sense. And even though I'm almost 30 years in, I'm not at 100%. That's a ridiculous notion. This field and this profession, this philosophy, this way of life is way too complicated to master, right? It's just not possible. I mean, 50% might be grandiose, honestly. But particularly when I think back to when I was at your stage, I didn't know anything. I knew a little bit, but I didn't know what I needed to know. I would read books from the masters. I remember reading this one book by Fritz Perls, and although he's speaking English, I didn't understand anything he was saying. But now I read that book and I understand everything that he's saying, because it's not a skill like learning calculus or something. Like, you study it enough, you'll figure it out. Being a therapist and navigating through all the literature and the philosophies and the methods and the theories, it's a paradigm shift. It's a language. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being. You have to have a lot of experience under your belt. Anyway, so that's number 2, is accepting your competence. Number 3 is so this is tips for a fruitful graduate school experience, is to make connections of various levels with professors and your classmates. Not only just to have friends, because, I'm friends with Bob, for example. We became friends in graduate school, and we weren't friends immediately. We had to kind of cultivate it over time. And we had other people that we were friends with, but Bob and I tended to sustain our friendship through the years. But anyway, so friendships are great, but also just having lowered anxiety, to feel like you can depend on people, or you can bounce ideas off, or you just feel like, well, if things go to crap, then I know that these people like me on some level, professors included. But also for one's career, especially private practice, you will depend on referral networks and having advice from people about ethical dilemmas, or renting an office. You can rent an office with your classmates and save a lot of money. Marketing tips, website tips, paperwork tips, consultation groups. Having those connections, being connected with professors is really helpful, because they can actually literally make your career. I remember learning early in my career that from Paul David, who, by the way, by the time this episode is aired, in all likelihood, he will have taken his life. I just have to go on this tangent for a second. Did you listen to my episode with my mentor, Paul David, and how he's doing assisted suicide?
No.
He has Alzheimer's, and he's 81 years old, and he is declining fast, and he knows how horrible it is to have Alzheimer's and how horrible it is for everyone around, because his mom and his grandma suffered from years of severe Alzheimer's, and he witnessed the loss of the personality, the terror that these people go through, and the confusion and the decline into a vegetative state. And so he doesn't want to do that, and he has to go through a lot of hoops to have medically assisted suicide in Europe, actually, because in North America it's not possible under the current legal situation. So anyway, it's just weird to talk about him in this way, because as right now he has the plan for the suicide in a few weeks, and by the time this airs, it will presumably have already happened. So it's just kind of weird to talk about him in this current situation for me personally, emotionally. Anyway, so what he told me early on is that research shows that success and satisfaction in this career, a major factor is having a mentor. Having not just a professor that is guiding you kind of, but someone that is focused on you and your entirety as a clinician and as a person. Being a therapist, being a counselor is much more than a job. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It changes everything. There's probably no other graduate school focus or discipline that results, and this is just anecdotal, that results in more divorces than any other graduate school type. Because not to say that going to graduate school will cause you to get divorced, but the transformation is so severe that it's if there's a crack in the foundation of a relationship, whether it's with your spouse or with your parents or with a friend or something, or your relationship with substances or your relationship with yourself, those cracks are going to widen and the foundation will start to fall apart. So graduate school to be a counselor is overwhelming, Have you experienced that? I mean, not that you're thinking about divorce, but that it's a very transformative experience.
Yeah, 100%. I embrace change. I enjoy it. I enjoy the feeling of understanding myself better inside, even though sometimes realizing that everything I thought before is complete bullshit. I enjoy that transformation, so I think that's one of the reasons why I am attracted to psychology. You said this may be one of the fields where there's more shifts in personality, right? Like opening of the cracks. Well, I've experienced also something similar with meditation practice, like mindfulness meditation sort of practice. I started that maybe around 8-9 years ago, and it's been very, very similar. It's a radical shift in the way of experiencing being a human, relating to others, relating to oneself. Values change, things that were important are not.
What became important through that process for you?
The thing that comes to mind faster is connection with others, is wanting to be of service and wanting to my life to bring value to those around me. Versus prior to my meditation practice, I think it was more about myself and people close to me, maybe my mother, my family, my best friends or my immediate friends. But now I feel that sense of compassion, let's say, it's wider, has opened up beyond just me and people close to me, but to other people. And again, I think that's one of the things that is leading me to.
How does it manifest for you? Because I don't meditate. I have, but I do spend time trying to block out the routine or the worries of life to focus on what I consider important. I'm trying to make it a routine that every morning after I kind of get everything done, I have my first cup of coffee on my deck, looking out in the trees and stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't listen to podcasts and I don't look at my phone and sometimes I'll put on a record or something, but I just try to relax just for 10 minutes a day, And I often will have that thought of like, what do I want to see in my life? And how is the rigmarole of life, the rat race of life, how is it eclipsing the meaning of my life or what I want to be doing with my time? What is the sort of things that I really want to be doing? And what I go to, and I want to know what you go to, is contact with people, like you say, with people that I'm not automatically in contact with. Getting back to Paul, like, he doesn't live in Seattle anymore, and we don't work at the university together anymore. So we're not in each other's life. So I have to remember to reach out to him, because, he's busy. And so I have to reach out to him. But I know that he always greatly appreciates it when I reach out to him. So I will sometimes while on my deck, I'll just call Paul on the phone and we'll have a conversation for 2 hours or something. I also think about like wanting to spend more time with my parents and going to lunch with them or hang out with them or something outside of the regular holiday activity, right? If I didn't take that time, I don't think I would realize that and prioritize it. Because in today's world, given how fractured everyone is living in their own homes and everything, it takes effort to say, okay, I'm going to commit to reaching out to that person and making a priority of actually having more contact with them, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. Years will go by and we'll barely have any in-depth kind of connecting conversation. What comes up for you?
Well, that's a lot. I'll go back to the question you asked about how this deeper sense of connection arises from meditation, right? And how it manifests in my life. So how I see meditation, meditation, you ask different people to describe it, and the description will be very different from people to people, person to person. But I think when I think about it in one specific way is about being present, and that's, I guess, often described like that, being in the moment. But to be more precise is to settle your attention in a specific object. Can be your breath, can be the view on your deck, can be the taste of your cup of coffee, can be whatever you want to set your attention in, and just stay there and let whatever discomforts arise, and be okay with that and include them, but not follow them as we usually follow intrusive thoughts, right? And we start then after that ruminating, and we completely lost the focus or the attention or the presence of what were we trying to focus on. So I feel that meditation can train that sense of focus or mind unification, bringing the mind together into a specific object, instead of having your mind in 5 different ways running over, not really being able to settle down or being able to, be even efficient at what you're doing. So that's one. And then how do you relate, or how do I relate this with others? I sit down and I meditate for a period of time, right? That's formal training, let's say, to cultivate your attention, your awareness, your equanimity, and all of that. And then you go out to the real world, right? You are surrounded by people, by things, by different objects that will pull your attention. Hopefully this training that you did for a structured period of time will start to show up in yourself, in your daily life. Of course, it's something that takes time. You are sort of deconditioning your mind from running from place to place to being more intentional and more okay with discomfort. And, there's a set of attributes basically that you are training, and depending on what type of meditation you are doing, you cultivate different types of attributes. There are some meditations that also cultivate ability to, it's loving kindness or empathy or compassion. I think I would take too long to describe them right now, but that's one of the ways I think to cultivate this particularly sense of connection with others. But even without doing that, I feel just from basic breath awareness meditation, where you're training to be present, you learn to be present with others too. When others are speaking, you may have a thought arise with something you want to say, or with a bias you have about what they are saying. But now you are aware of that because of the training you were doing before. So that allows you to just be with the other, be with the emotions, with the behavior, with all of the stuff they are bringing, and also be with many times the suffering that other persons are experiencing and are expressing. And similarly, when to play, like music, you become more sensitive to sounds, you become more sensitive to rhythm, to all of these nuances of music. When you meditate, you become more sensitive to life, right? And to maybe hints of that the other person may be suffering, maybe displaying anger, but you may be more sensitive to what's behind the anger. And just being with that, there's nothing to do. I think that most natural human response to that is compassion and wanting to alleviate that suffering. That of course comes from a place of empathy and understanding, and it's not always easy because of how different we are, and at the same time how similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a long answer.
No, I like it.
A little bit. But
I like to talk with mindfulness experts such as yourself because it is inspirational. As you're talking, I'm not only thinking about the moments that I can relate to what you're saying, like when I'm having my coffee, I am not formally being mindful, but it is a practice of mind. I'm trying to make sure that certain things aren't going to distract me, and I do take note of where my mind goes and am trying to be intentional about that. And also as a therapist, when I'm sitting with a client, having that awareness of like, where is my mind going and what do I want to be focusing on and what does it feel like to go down this direction or that direction? So a lot of what we do is based on anxiety and survival and fear. Sometimes that's important to address, but if we're constantly in that state, we're not focusing on the other aspects of life, our need for relaxation, our need for paying attention to things, our need to connect with other people, opportunities to be compassionate and to really listen to someone else, Like as a therapist, if you're, and this is common for all trainees, if you're terrified of screwing up as a therapist, you're not really listening to the client, right? Or it's harder to listen to the client. So having that ability or awareness to notice intrusive thoughts or certain impulses or states of mind and redirect is, really helpful. But also, I'm not really encapsulating what you just did to me by explaining mindfulness in your way. It made me more relaxed as I was just listening to you. Because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, okay, what is my body doing right now? What is my breathing doing right now? What is my mind doing right now? How tense am I? And this is emotional awareness and regulation and body somatic work. It's all related in that way. Do you plan on using mindfulness in your practice?
I think I will naturally go that route.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what approach, method, how I will do it, but I think that will come out eventually, whether I like it or not.
Yeah, well, that's great. You're already there in that aspect, and I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people. That's really nice. So yeah, those are my 3 tips. Do you have any other questions?
I do. I have many more, but yeah, I am surprised, I guess, that you didn't mention anything specific about learning in your top 3 tips. Mm-hmm. Why was that? I guess is one of the questions.
Well, one, I know that the students are busting their ass anyway to learn, so I don't need to tell people to do that. That's one of the nice things about being a professor at graduate school is that I don't have to motivate people. The students, 99% of them are so motivated. If anything, I have to tell them to slow down and give themselves a break, When you're going through graduate school, you're really focused on like grades and, making sure your papers are good enough or written well enough and all that stuff has nothing to do with what it is to be a therapist. I've had students who were terrible or relatively under average students when it came to papers and tests and stuff, but they were top of the class in terms of their ability and their wisdom as a clinician. Now, sometimes they're related. You can be both. It's not like it's exclusive, but the foci that students have is important because you got to graduate. And as professors, as a program, we have to have some way of evaluating you. And we decide as a collective that it's going to be written papers and following APA guidelines and making sure you're citing things and your arguments make sense and you can demonstrate you understand theory. But I'm telling you, that has very little to do with one's ability to be a therapist. So I'm more concerned with your ability to be a therapist. I'm more concerned with your own satisfaction and your help of human beings. So that's why, and my tips, I think, are related to that if you can, like along these lines, if I could get students to accept that it's okay to fail a class, they'll just take it over again. Which will never happen because students are inherently terrified and self-flagellating about even getting like a lower competency rating. Mm-hmm. Then I would do that. I'd wave a magic wand and say, don't worry about even passing. Just absorb and be and go in directions that you feel like you want to go in. Things will work out because you have the desire, you want to make a difference in the world, and don't let worry about grades get in the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely resonate with that. I mean, personally, I don't care much about grades, I think. What I do care about is about acquiring knowledge, and not only, like as in memorizing and being able to recite this textbook here like easily or whatever, but more than that, to do, it seems helpful to do what you do running the podcast. Or, for example, mm-hmm. in my view, and you correct me if I'm wrong, in many episodes, you don't even think about what to say. It seems that creatively you have 1,000 or like 100 different theories and things that could be used to skillfully convey an idea, and you do it very skillfully. And I imagine that that's something that not only is useful for podcasting, but also in therapy, mm-hmm. to maybe trigger insight or to help, guide a client or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's that type of learning that I'm interested in. That's one. And then the other one is the type of learning that I am able to sort of shift my own life and values and viewpoints and integrate those learnings to bring to life, to daily life, and to myself.
Yeah.
If I wish to, I won't do that for every theory or for every concept or whatever, but for the ones that strike me or as valuable, do that. So I guess those are the two different types of learning that I'm interested in.
Is it working? Are you learning in that way?
I'm trying to, and I am being curious of how to be more intentional about that versus the classical memorizing or, I got, what's the grade we get?
Competency ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is right, but it seemed like I'll just tell you what I went through in my various graduate school pursuits. That in graduate school, when you're swimming in all the action, it can feel like nothing is being absorbed. Right. And that although you're learning stuff things are moving by so fast and you don't feel like you know how to use any of it yet. I guess it's sort of like Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi is telling Daniel's son to wax the car and paint the fence. It's kind of like that in that you won't necessarily feel the concrete nature of your learning and your development until later. Right now you're absorbing a lot, and it'll in all likelihood come out later on. It just becomes integrated into who you are. Being a therapist is so amorphous as a action, as a occupation, that you don't know when you're doing it and when you're not. Mm-hmm. So you'll be a therapist for a couple years after graduation, and you'll be thinking that you're doing the right thing because your clients keep coming back, but you'll have a hard time really pointing a finger at like, how exactly am I helping people? Because it's not concrete. It's not like you're a plumber and there's a leak and you fix the leak. Mm-hmm. Or you are a chair maker and you made a chair and people are sitting in the chair. Being a therapist, being a counselor, there's nothing like that. Clients sometimes get worse, and yet we're doing a good job as a therapist. So it's very hard to evaluate. And as you're going through graduate school, you're checking in with yourself and thinking, well, I don't feel any more confident in my ability to help people than I did when I started. Sometimes people feel less confident because there's just more information or more worry or something. So that's just normal. And I consider that, although terrifying, glorifying aspect of our career, is that it's so hard to master that there's always something more to learn. There's always the thought that pops in my head is, as a musician, when I'm playing with other musicians and we're learning a new song or we're developing something, the funnest and most euphoric experience as a musician, and other musicians will attest to this, is when you are just mastering something, and the metaphor is like you're running down the road and you're almost falling over, but you're staying on your feet. Once you learn the song and it's just second nature, it's no longer as fun. It can still be fun, but it's euphoric to crest that hill and to you're all syncing up and you're in the groove, and you're not quite sure if you're going to succeed with the next note, but you do, and you pull it off and things are working. It's euphoric. And it's the same with being a therapist, except it's always that way. Especially if you keep varying the clients you work with. You keep stretching yourself into new areas, or you try to go even deeper, or you try to explore that other corner of your personality that relates to your work as a therapist and your bias and your and your wisdom. Being a therapist is, if you do it right, you can constantly be in the euphoria of running down the road while almost tripping. We're running out of time, but I just want to get to a couple other questions that you asked, that you sent me. One easy question I can answer is, you asked why I got a PsyD instead of a PhD. And there's a lot of talk in psychology about, do I get a PsyD? Do I get a PhD? It really just depends on what you want to do with the degree and the program. There's ideas of like, PsyDs are, some people say PsyDs are more clinical and more practical. Other people say PsyDs are lesser and not as rigorous or as prestigious or something. It really isn't that way. It might have been that way 30 years ago, but it's not that way today. Every program is different. It really just, like I said, depends on what you want to do. For me, the reason why I got a PsyD is that it was much more mundane, in that I was told by my mentor, Paul David, that I needed to get a doctorate in order to become program director. He really wanted me to take over. He had developed the CFT program, and he wanted me to take over for him because he wanted to retire. And this was, 15 years ago or something. And he said, you have to get a doctorate because you can't be program director if you don't have a doctorate. And I was like, oh, okay. So I looked into my options, and one of the best options was to go to Antioch to get my doctorate. The only doctorate that Antioch had at the time was the PsyD. They didn't have the PhD program back then. And the benefits were that I would get 60% off my tuition as an employee, because I'm a professor, and so 60% off of a total tuition amount of $150,000, $200,000 is quite a savings. To go from like $180,000 to $80,000, and I lived across the street from the university, and I could work and then walk down the hall and go to class, or talk to one of my professors. It just made sense. The downside to getting a PsyD was that PsyDs don't recognize masters in other professions. So I had to start over and get another master's and then start my doctorate. So on that level, then it's like, well, if I just went to a traditional PhD program that honored my master's, I probably would have saved 60% anyway, and it would have been a lot less work and a lot less time. But that was my decision-making process. It didn't go much beyond that. So what other questions do you have for me?
Yeah, I think you were about to mention this question that I had about if I'm interested about going to private practice, would it be worth it to before that have 1 year or some time in an agency?
It depends. When I started, that's what I did. I was hired by my internship agency and then pretty quickly developed my private practice, but it took a while for it to become full-time, a few years, and I had the luxury at my agency to kind of taper off with my clients so I could, pretty month by month transition away from the agency and towards my private practice. Most agencies won't let you do that. You're either full-time with them or you're not, kind of a thing. The pro to doing agency for a while after graduation is that you learn things that you wouldn't learn otherwise. There's a different set of clients. Plus, working alongside all these other colleagues. Typically, agencies have dozens of therapists and clinicians that you can become friends with and consult with and hear from in group consultation meetings and stuff. So there's a lot of benefit to it. The downside is that the pay sucks. And why does the pay suck? Well, because tax dollars aren't being allocated enough. The other thing about agency, another con about working in an agency is it wouldn't be uncommon to have half of your clients not really want to be in therapy with you. They have to see you because of med management, or they're being forced into therapy by their parents or something. And that's a bummer. It's not the end of the world, and it doesn't mean that you can't work around that or convince people or have fun anyway, or have minor moments of therapy. But it's so much nicer when someone is dying to talk to you and they can't wait to meet with you every week, and they're like, okay, let's have a conversation. It feels better.
Yeah.
So private practice typically has that. You can't really go wrong with either one, like I said, because there's pros and cons. Mm-hmm. You'll hear other professors say things like, well, if you go right into private practice, you're not competent enough to work on your own. That's ridiculous. That's right. Like definitionally untrue.
That's what I heard so far. That's why I was bringing that question. Yeah.
Okay. That's like untrue. There's no basis for that statement. And by contrast, what are you saying? Like, you can be incompetent as a therapist and work in an agency? If anything, it's the opposite, because agency work is arguably much harder, and you need much more skill, because private practice clients tend to be pretty easy. So there's that. The other thing that I'll hear that I will push back on is I'll hear professors tell students that it is not socially just to go into private practice because you're going to service middle class and upper income people, and you are not giving back to society. You're oppressing the disadvantaged people by not working in an agency. And what I say to that is, fuck you, because you're already helping society, one. Two, you have to pay your bills. This isn't a charity that you're signing up for. You're trying to have a career. You're trying to pay your bills. You're trying to squirrel away a little money for retirement or a college fund for your kids. It's not your responsibility to sacrifice your life and your career and your upward mobility because society is fucked up and doesn't care about the disadvantaged. Just because we know that there are disadvantaged people doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice. It's sort of be like saying, well, if you got a degree in climate science, that you can't go on public transportation because it uses energy that causes carbon and pollution. That's ridiculous. So every climate scientist has to walk everywhere or bike everywhere. They can't get on an airplane because they know about something. And, in the same way, we know that there are disadvantaged people, but it's not our fault that there are disadvantaged people. We need to do something about it ethically and morally, But all that has to be balanced out, So going into private practice and being able to pay your bills and pay off your student loans in a timely manner. And by timely manner, it could be 7-8 years before you pay off your student loans. It can be a long time, depending on if you are going to student debt. But anyway, so yeah, what are you leaning towards in terms of agency versus private practice?
Before it was already private practice, but now after hearing you, I'm even more leaning towards private practice.
Okay, yeah.
Hopefully the time I have, in my internship, it's enough time in an agency, and also that may inform where I want to go afterwards.
Did I answer your questions?
Yeah, you did. I have a quick follow-up question about the goals part. Maybe not necessarily goals, but aspirations or intentions, not something super concrete. I want to hit 1 million followers in my podcast or YouTube channel, but you are doing it, I assume, for a reason other than you like it. I also assume you like all of the things you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you have aspirations around those things. Yeah, reasons that motivate you to do them besides just intrinsic joy that you get out of them.
Yeah, to try to make the world a better place. Anyway, I don't know how to put this. Anyway, that's my goal, is to try to make the world a better place. And I think about that every morning. Not obsessively, but it's like, okay, how can I try to leave this planet having attempted. I always say attempted because I don't know if I'm actually helping anyone. I can't know that, but I can know that I tried. I can know, and I do have control over that. And so I think about that every day. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Definitely helping me at least. So that's one.
And I think, whether it's God or the universe or something else, karma, I think when we do that, things work out.
Yeah.
Do you think that?
I also don't know why. I don't particularly believe in God or necessarily karma, but things turn out to be that way in my personal experience, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it's magic or supernatural or just one's perspective or what comes around goes around.
The one's perspective seems to be a big part of it. If you are, if you give people the benefit of the doubt, trying to help, be understanding of that, there's less stress, right? Building up. There's less fear. There's more openness. And as you mentioned, like not being anxious being important for grad school, I think it's just important for life, right? Being open and being able to, or being willing to embrace life with its bad and pros and cons. Yeah, that feels good at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put. Well, I can tell, Andres, that you're going to be a wonderful counselor. You have a great energy about you, good listener, and a calming presence, a safe presence. I can also tell that you're quite smart. I can tell by the questions you sent and also the way that you're talking. There's a wisdom to you as well that I'm sure will translate well with your clients. I could see people really gravitating towards you.
Thanks, Kirk.
And everyone out there, including you, Andres, take care of yourself. Why should people take care of themselves, Andres?
Because you deserve it.